Our world is lost in unnecessary fear and hurt. Our systems seem scientifically engineered to make you small, powerless, and always waiting for the next great leader who will fix the problems around us. Worse, we're witnessing neighbor versus neighbor while warfare breaks out around our family tables. But you have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. Jim, I'm really glad to be here talking to you right now. I know the kind of a week it's been. And everybody who's listening, we wanted to do this show, and we've had to put it off a couple of days thanks to some tornadoes that were slightly interfering with Jim's travel back from Freedom Fest. And most urgently on top of that was the assassination attempt on President Trump over the weekend. So it's what, Monday, Tuesday? What day are we on now, man?
We're on Tuesday.
We're on the Tuesday night following.
Tuesday night following. We're taping on Tuesday night following.
Yeah, just for context, everybody, because that's an important component of this. And with incredible grace, brother, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're still awake after the travel hell you went through. And I think we ought to start not with that, but with actual disclaimers here about what we're going to discuss, because this is an important concept. We want to make sure that people are right on board with our mindset right now and why we're talking about the things we're talking about. So, disclaimers.
Well, I don't believe that we know enough yet about what happened and the motive of the assassin, the alleged assassin.
Yes, I'm right with you.
I don't believe we know enough at this juncture. And what I'm going to say here is general prescription rather than specific prescription. There's a lot of people that think they do know the motives of the people involved, whether or not there is more than one person or not, etc. I am not at this juncture in a position, and I think this, again, we've talked repeatedly about steel manning things, and we've talked about making sure you had evidence to back your claims. I do not believe that I should go beyond that, but that doesn't mean that this moment cannot be instructive. That's the first thing. The second thing I want to say is, and I want to make this completely clear, for a reason I'm going to also make clear, we have outright opposition to political violence. Period. Full stop. I was in a conversation. I have seen tweets and various Facebook posts where people are saying that they were actually happy or pleased or wish even more that the assassin didn't miss. I am completely opposed to that, 100%. And Bill, I want to go one step further and say that not only is that wrong and that I oppose it, I'm going to oppose it as consistently as possible. In fact, I believe that the perspective I'm going to bring today is the only view that can oppose political violence consistently. So sometimes, people will say, well, wait a minute, certain other activities happened. This is justified. This typically falls under the title of what's called whataboutism. We're not going to engage in any whataboutism here. And I am not engaging in that specifically because I'm able to make a consistent, full-throated, all-the-way argument in opposition, complete and full, to trying to use violence to achieve any social end.
Would you also extend that opposition to events like January 6th? Don't have to discuss it. I'm just curious how far that opposition to political violence extends for you.
Yes. I believe that situation has been grossly exaggerated, but I also believe it was wrong. And I further believe it was stupid. And from the moment that it happened, I commented upon the stupidity of it. I've been at this long enough that I know that there are people whose preference is to destroy or lead you into trouble by leading you into violence. And I want you to understand that violence has a consequence, not just to the people that are going to be targeted. It has a consequence to you. It has a consequence to your family. It has a consequence to your friends. It has a consequence to your community. And in some cases, it can have a consequence to your entire nation. And frequently, these consequences are not the things that you hope they would be. But even if they did achieve the end that you want, the price that will be paid along the way will often be incredibly stupefying, just large, intense, and immense.
I find myself in shock and somewhat immobilized by fear. Maybe it's rational, maybe it's irrational. But fear is a part of what the what do we even call the non-graceful actors are trying to foment here, right?
Yeah, and fear is the center of everything we're about to discuss today. Fear is the motive and the basis for the things that we're going to go into today. Fear has a meaning. False evidence appearing real. It's subjective. It's in the mind. It's not a realized thing. I fear that X is going to happen or Y is going to be the outcome. And I have enough divine power. I have enough divine recognition of that fear that I believe I can take it upon myself to affect change through whatever means are possible.
Wait. So hold on. You're talking like a you're talking like a religious terrorist.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting. People who are acting on fear are acting on that basis. They're acting on the ability to play God. They're acting on the ability to say, I have this, I can do this. I am the power. If I don't do something, what's going to happen?
Right. Yes, I see. It's all on. I am, for whatever reason that I might decide I am, the actor who needs to fix this.
Okay. And it doesn't stop there. We're going to go all the way down to the level of how people vote today or how people express themselves verbally. We're going to go all the way to that level because this entire system is riddled with fear. That fear leads to a behavior. That behavior leads to politics, and the politics is inherently violence. So fear has a source. It's false evidence appearing real. It's given to us by the tempter. It's the temptation to believe that we somehow or other have to be God ourselves. We have to figure out how to navigate this world on our own. I'm going to be throwing around a lot of theological concepts today because we have to get into something, and we're going to start doing more of this on the show, even though the show is about this concept kind of from the beginning. I've been given a set of words in recent research that helped me understand that I'm not the first to think about these ideas. Surprise, surprise, right? Nothing new under the sun. Political theology, the idea that many of the concepts that end up imbuing what we call government and politics are theological in nature, many of them. And it's something that has been thought about for a very long time. And I was aware of one strain or two strains or three strains of those thoughts. I'm thinking of them as I'm rattling that off here. But the idea that somebody sat down and said, listen, this is how it all works. And they said it for a bad reason. We'll get to them in a moment. But I just want to say, I grabbed some scripture before I came on here. John 8:15. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Daddy. Looking at God. Philippians 4. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. You're supposed to put your burdens to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. 1 Peter 5:7. Casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. John 16:33, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So the antidote, the response to fear is to place trust in something outside of present circumstances. In the Christian view, it's an invitation to a direct relationship with God the Father through his son Jesus. That's the way that that's done. Whatever your tradition is, I think this is the best path. That's why I'm here. But whatever your tradition is, you have to find a way to escape the bounds of this present situation because you are not God. You do not have full sight. You do not understand everything that's happening. You don't have the ability to sit in judgment of other people in the ways that you think that you do.
Yeah, it's called social media, people.
But fear persists. And fear in this case,
you sent me some very interesting philosophy on this.
Yeah.
And the one thing that is curious to me right now as we're talking about fear is that in the political philosophy that you're going to get to in a minute, there's very little mention made of fear, because it was all about stopping chaos, right? Stopping the chaos, holding off the chaos. And there's a different motivation for that in the political philosophy, which is interesting to me because, we normal people, not the philosopher types, we normal people don't experience these cataclysmic events as a philosophical issue. We experience them as hard feelings.
Right.
So help me connect the dots, Jim, because I know that the fear is there. Obviously, it's there.
So
And
starting in the middle of the 1600s, we leave the realm of kings and move into the realm of states.
yes,
Statehood is that modern a concept, and very quickly, right at the instant, right at the start of it, there is a man there by the name of Hobbes, Hobbes, and he writes a book called Leviathan.
yeah,
And this is kind of the initial social contract. The United States was supposed to be more of John Locke's social contract, which comes about 45, 50 years later in terms of his writing about it. But Hobbes really is dominant, particularly on the political left in this country. It's a social contract where we give up some of our powers to, and this is my own colloquial language, but it makes it clear and easy for you to understand, to some kind of super bully. There are people out there that are chaos agents. They bully others. They do bad things. We need a bully that's bigger than all of them, potentially combined. And so we give up some of the freedoms that we have. We give up some of our ability to make decisions to a collective body, which is Leviathan, a beast, which will settle scores. And this is the beginning of a foundation of a cult. The Libertarian Party, right in its preamble, right in its statement of principles, refers to it as the cult of the omnipotent state. And Hobbes is beginning to lay down this pattern that the state's going to take us and bring us out of an era or a natural state, which is nasty, brutish, and short. It's full of chaos.
right, right.
And the state will protect and provide order. He's followed up by Hegel, who comes in and says that there is somebody who is triumphant over that chaos. They are so effective, they are so skilled at being it, that they earn the title of being the magistrate. They earn the title of being king because they are heroes. So this is kind of an updated version of Plato's philosopher king, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They triumph over that order, that chaos, and give us order. So they're kind of a messianic figure, as it were.
Sure.
But Carl Schmitt in the 20th century literally terms this political theology and begins categorizing or carefully codifying and explaining how this works. Now, I just want to give you a tiny bit of background on Carl Schmitt. There's two things I want you to know about him. I want you to know that he is a respected political science figure. They call him a jurist, actually. He understands law extremely well and is quoted by various figures to this very day, which is extraordinary because he was writing in the end of the Weimar Republic and was one of the key figures in the legal structure that was put together and a key player in Nazi Germany. And when the war was over, he refused to participate in what was kind of the equivalent of the Truth and Reconciliation program post-World War II, which was called denazification. He refused to renounce and move on. He continued to write. He continued to put stuff out. He's clearly brilliant, and you'll figure it out quickly if you start to interact with his stuff. And another reason you'll figure that out, my second point, is that he's still with us to this day. Not as a human being, that he's deceased, but his ideas are just as powerful as they ever were. Now, you're probably horrified to hear that, or maybe you assume automatically I'm exaggerating.
Oh, YouTube has probably already taken us down by this time.
Well, here's why I'm going to tell you that. We just recently went through a worldwide event. Everybody participated where there was a certain disease that spread around the planet. C plus, we call it here. And that there was a process called lockdown. There were a number of different acts that were promulgated from the executive branch of the federal government and from the governors of the various states, where legislators were not consulted, law was not passed and then executed by the leader. The leader made decreed the law and then enforced it.
Yep. Stroke of the
And
pen.
that is Carl Schmitt. That is Schmittian to the very T. It is exactly what he advocated. He believed that the executive needed to be able to act. It was reasonable, and it was the most efficient thing to do, and it was also vital to the safety of the people that he be able to act quickly and without massive consultation. Democracy's a drag, man. The ability to go and have other people be consulted in this whole process slows down what is potentially response to an emergency situation. It encumbers with various other people's requests and complaints and whatever. It waters down the ability to be effective. The executive needs to be free, not you. The executive needs to be free in order to provide security, in order to fight off this chaos.
This is a sort of a benevolent dictator paradigm, right?
It is. It is. Now, he recognized that that's not perfect. So did Hobbes. So did Hegel. These guys recognize that this stuff isn't going to all go swimmingly and great, right? That there's going to be people that get leadership and power that are going to do bad things, and sometimes they're going to make mistakes. They don't care. I mean, at the end of the day, Schmitt doesn't care about that.
Yeah. It's about having the ability for direct action rather than working through the, what do we call it, the government machinery?
Yeah.
Of democracy.
But Schmitt explicitly recognizes something that Hobbes had said and Hegel had implied. He explicitly recognizes that there are concepts that are in the Bible, which had permeated all of Western tradition, that basically were the subjective underpinnings of the entire structures and thought processes that made our government.
This is what gets interesting.
Yeah, mindset matters, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the mindset here is can be summed up in two words. The first one is the eschaton. So the eschaton is the coming time of blissful rule under the leadership of King Jesus. It's the time when lion lays down with lamb, everything is harmony and peace and love. This is a time of the future. It's promised in the Bible that this time is coming, that there'll be in the return and rule of Jesus. Okay. I'm not going to get into what all that means theologically today. This is not a theology course. This is political theology, which is the notion not that we're trying to mix religion and state. That's not what's going on here. This is literally a scholarly field within philosophy and political science, where they're trying to understand what are the influences and the things that underpin our subjective view or understanding of how government is supposed to work. How do we converse about these ideas? And it's hard not to notice, which I'm going to show you in a second, how much this goes on.
So is this something that is like an overlay on top of the Christian Bible, or is this from the bottom up, recognizing what's in the Bible and saying the ultimate end of it all has got to be eschaton?
Great question, because there's a second term we need to bring into this, and that is the Katechon.
Oh, yes.
Katechon. And the reason, though, this word basically means the force that withholds, the power that withholds, the person that withholds, the one that withholds. Somebody is a great restraint on chaos, on evil. Now, there's a specific application of this term that the Apostle Paul is using when he's speaking to the Thessalonians in the epistle, the second epistle to them in the Bible. Second Thessalonians 2 is where this phrase comes up.
And the Thessalonians were rowdy, right? They were hard to keep under control.
Okay, they're excited about the coming, and they're doing a whole bunch of things to anticipate that. They're not living in the present reality. And Paul's basically warning them, whoa, careful. You still have to live in the here and now. Like there's this tension between, yes, Christ is coming, and yes, you need to live in the here and now. These concepts have to be held both simultaneously, and they basically are out of whack. But what is interesting in our particular case today is that Carl Schmitt says the withholding force, he secularizes it and makes it basically political. And in political theology, he argues that the concept of the political is based on theological concepts and language. So the state, like God, is omnipotent. The state, like God, is the arbiter and the judge. The state, like God, is the legislator of law. The state, like God, is all sovereign. And the state, this is the worst one as far as I'm concerned, like God, is something internal, which is him tying into this whole Schmitt thing. So let me explain exactly how he ends up applying this, because this is fascinating to me. It's absolutely fascinating. I have talked about this concept called the conflict machine before, right? And we're going to get into that here. But I realize, I'm looking at Schmitt's work and realizing he already anticipated this. He already identified this. And where I see a flaw, he sees a virtue. So in politics, there is a friend-enemy distinction. Politics shows up anytime we find a friend-enemy distinction. They have to compete with one another to settle their score, and that is politics. But I want you to notice that the word enemy is in the midst of this. And he suggests, Schmitt goes so far as to suggest that this birth of politics makes this event the most important event. It is the event over all events, because the state is going to end up using some kind of violence to bring everything in line. So is economics more important than the state? No, because at the end of the day, this is going to be settled by a friend-enemy distinction. Is religion more important than the state? No, because at the end of the day, even that can be settled by a friend-enemy distinction. Name any question you want, the ability to come in and impose force, which will inevitably arise from this friend-enemy distinction, where friends and enemies will gather into tribes and begin to fight with one another, makes it so that this level of politics, this friend-enemy distinction, is triumphant. That is the birth of the state, and that is the Katechon in which we live now. And in fact, he goes one step further and says it pushes off the Eschaton. It keeps that event at complete future. There's nothing that we can do. There's no evolving, emerging process where we're getting closer to the Eschaton. It's all Katechon until Jesus himself shows up.
Okay, so there's nothing that this process of pushing off Eschaton can do to course correct. Because if it stopped holding off Eschaton, everything would collapse.
Exactly. Chaos would rule. It would take over.
And that ties right back into the fear, which is everybody saying, oh, if we don't hold off the evil, whatever that is, by doing this thing, we're screwed. Everything's going to collapse. Now,
you put it all together. You've
right?
Just put
Today's
it all together.
Political terms, like you can't vote for X because he's not the pro-democracy candidate. Or we have to save democracy, whatever the buzzwords are, right?
Okay. So
as we don't, then Eschaton's coming.
I want to go on a jihad right now.
Yes, please.
Against the word politics. Okay.
I love it when Jim does this. By the way, this is a rare moment. If you're listening, Jim's great at this stuff. Here we go.
We use this term way too much, way too cavalierly, way too easy, and we even pretend that somehow or other it's good. The conflict machine, which we'll get to in a moment, I'm going to break down what that is a better description of what politics is. Schmitt is being accurate and precise. These are religious, spiritually loaded concepts. And I want you to notice what's happening here. Politics is not anything else other than friend-enemy warfare. It is two groups who decided that they are not going to settle their differences by talking with one another, reasoning things out, allowing live and let live, allowing people to go their own way, allowing people to express their values. No, it must be done my way. You are the enemy. That's politics. And so when people say, well, we need a calmer, more peaceful politics, they are literally offering us an oxymoron. Is it possible that there are varying degrees of politics? As in there are varying degrees of violence, as in there are various degrees of crime. Yes, all of those things exist. We can say that crime's a crime, but we can also say that some crimes are worse than other crimes. We can say that some laws are worse than other laws. We can say that some violence is worse than other violence. We could say all those things. But at the end of the day, there's still crimes, there's still laws, there's still violence. And they're still being promulgated by the tribalism in which we live and exist. So, politics is war by other means.
Politics is war by other means.
Yes. And this is an inversion of a statement by Karl von Clausewitz, who said that war is politics by other means. See, I want you to understand the stakes are incredibly high here. We're not talking about minor things. So when the president is targeted and even struck by an assassin's bullet, we all of a sudden have this wake-up moment. And even his opponent, who clearly doesn't like him, who has said that he is an existential threat to democracy itself, the god of the age, he has said, whoa, 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 it's never excusable. And he does this from the Oval Office. He hasn't done many Oval Office addresses, but he did this one, right? Because we all recognize, wait a minute, we didn't intend for it to go that far. But it goes that far routinely.
Yeah,
it's
that's
just
the
that,
point.
It's just that it's a different ox being gored in a different setting in a different way. Okay.
Yes.
And I want to put a fine point on this. We have a clip I want to play for you. And if I'm understanding correctly, this is Paul Neal. Is that his name?
Yes, I believe we're saying it's a SEAL veteran, Navy SEAL veteran,
who was apparently involved in taking out bin Laden. This was said on the Jimmy Rex show. We'll put a link to it so you can get it. This came off of TikTok. Someone shared this with me over the weekend, and I'm grateful. But I want to put a point in this. I want to start to show that this war by other means is very prevalent, and I want to show where it comes from. Could you play that clip, please, Bill?
Point now, right? I don't think I fought for the country. I fought for some politician's view on something. I remember one dude in particular that I killed in his, I shot his buddy, and then I came through his room. I killed him in front of his wife in a bedroom because he went for a gun. And I think about him now, and it's like, all right, why did I kill that guy? Well, because he went for a gun. Okay, but why did he go for a gun? Well, because I was in his room at 2 a.m. Well, why was I in his room at 2 a.m? Well, because George Bush was pissed that Saddam Hussein allegedly wanted to kill his dad, so we invaded. And then I start to think, what if I met him in Paris over a coffee? Would we have actually liked each other and I just kill him because a politician sent us here for weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist? The only reason we were killing each other is because we were born on different parts of the world. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
I understand the value of having to protect and defend and all those things, but like when you start seeing Ukraine and some of these things that are happening right now, of like putting us in these wars that there's just no winners. And when you've been to those countries, it's like, damn, like those are real people. I watched the real people there, and it doesn't feel real from the United States because we just see it on TV. But like when you've walked those streets, it just hits you different.
It's rare for someone to be that open about what they did in the line of duty. Just to say for the audience, if you have personal friends, that's something, but this is national. This is on, it's out there for everybody to see.
I admire that because of who it came from. More than words could possibly express. If I say that, that's a statement that has been born through spiritual exploration and reason. But when he says that, he lived it.
He lived it.
And he did what everybody says is heroic, and he's telling you he's basically holding up and saying these medals ain't worth it. This is what I was asked to be and what I was asked to do. I said at the top of the show, in one of the disclaimers, there's no whataboutism here. You can't accuse that of being whataboutism. So we can go the full distance on this. We can say that it's all wrong. And we can begin raising some really important discussions right now in this difficult moment. And thank God it wasn't more difficult. Thank God it did not actually turn into the tragedy that was there. And the lives of the people that were lost, the people that were harmed in that event, we're sorry and we pray for them. But I want to be clear, it would have been a much bigger deal, and it would have been much worse for all of us as a country if that bullet had been 1 inch over. And having said that, putting those disclaimers on the table, playing this clip, discussing what politics really is, I want to point to some recent historical events. Obama, former president, was involved in the assassination of Anwar al-Awlaki. This was done via drone or missile. They sent a missile in and killed him where they found him.
Yep.
Now you say, so what? Anwar al-Awlaki, that doesn't sound very American. Well, he was actually a New Mexico-born U.S. citizen. Naturalized just as you and I, born here from this country. He wasn't in this country when he was killed. Let's be clear about that. But this was what's called an extrajudicial killing. There was no due process attached to this decision. The President of the United States claimed it on his own authority. At the time, the ACLU and others raised the specter that this set a terrible precedent. And so far, we haven't really seen it carried out against American citizens like this, except, I want to say, that days later, a drone targeted at another person ended up collecting collateral damage. Abdullah Rahman al-Awlaki, which was Anwar al-Awlaki's 15-year-old son. So in review, the president took an extrajudicial step, an extra meaning beyond judicial step, abrogating power to himself to be judge, jury, and executioner to take out an American rather than try to capture him, which is the way that we do things in due process. And then later his son. The target of this recent event, Donald Trump, was involved in the assassination of Major General Qasem Soleimani on the 3rd of January, 2020. We spent a lot of time talking about January 6th, but what about January 3? On January 3, an Iranian general was assassinated. It's an open statement. No one's denying it. Was assassinated by our government. And then just hours before we sit down to do this program, just hours ago, the New York Times has breaking news that the U.S. detected an Iranian plot to kill Trump separate from last weekend's shooting. Coming home. Those events coming home. That's the gravity of the war that politics brings us to. It says that it's okay to use violence to achieve your goals. So, Bill, let's get into a discussion about the conflict machine. We've brought it up here several times. This is we're going to share an article from the Exit Network in the show notes that I wrote about this subject, and I'm going to share with you how I came to it, independent of the Schmittian path. The conflict machine is a system to address social problems that divides members of societies into warring parties where there must be losers. The emphasis in that statement is on loser. Someone has to lose. This is not a win-win transaction. This is a war where someone loses. Okay.
So when you see zero-sum language and things like that, that's
yes.
conflict machine language.
There may be no winners in this case, but there have to be losers. Losers are absolutely essential. We went into this with Jerry Boyer. We talked about the delicious tears of our enemies and so forth. The machine is turned on whenever someone creates a proposal where those who opposed it are coerced into compliance or forced to foot the bill. And this machine is fueled specifically by coercion. Some people have to abandon their preferred way of life or face a penalty, even if that way of life harms no one. Their happiness must be sacrificed. And sacrifice, there you go. See, there is theological language showing up.
Yep.
Right?
For the good of the many, the few must suffer.
To the greater good. These appeals to the greater good almost always hide both the coercion and the lost happiness.
Sure.
And as a result, aggression becomes culturally in our own behaviors acceptable. And I am submitting to you that the conflict machine is a more vivid, clear description of what politics is. Every time you hear the word politics, you should think conflict machine, conflict machine. Politics equals the conflict machine.
Yeah, I'm sold on this. I think I read your article back when it went live. Maybe one of the reasons that we're talking now.
That is, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is, because I know we met through that site.
Yep.
So we'll share that that article in the show notes. Now, before we get, I want to delve a little bit deeper into this, but I want to say this. We want governance. And in fact, government of some kind shows up naturally everywhere we go. If you've ever joined a club, there's usually a chair, somebody running the meeting.
Yeah,
there's usually
facilitates.
Right. There's somebody that's a treasurer, it's taking care of the money, right? There's a secretary, they're taking the notes and they're making sure records get filed. We tend to set up governance everywhere we go. Sometimes it's very, very ad hoc. Someone's going to go pick up the pizza.
Right.
Or is going to place the order, right? We're not all going to collectively do it. Someone's going to take that responsibility. So at that moment, they're governing the process. Nothing wrong with governance. And in fact, there's nothing wrong with government. We have government all over the place. And in fact, in my ideal view of the world, we'd have more government than we have now. But the difference would be you'd get to choose what those governments are.
Yeah.
Who are your regulators? Well, they could be your insurance companies. So what's your social safety net look like? Well, it depends on what clubs and groups you join, right? Or who your friends are. We would be able to choose these relationships for ourselves rather than have them imposed upon us, okay? The state is a different beast. And I'm not making anything up. This is not libertarianism 101. There are other sociologists from early in the 20th century, Oppenheimer, Weber. There are so many other people who've come along and explained what this is. It is the institution that has the moral authority. Where do they get that moral authority? From us. Moral authority. There's another spiritual concept coming in right there. They have the moral authority to initiate force to achieve a social goal. In other words, as Mao put it, they get a gun and they can, you're at the barrel of it. They can say, this is what you're going to do. And we all agree that they're allowed to have this power. So that's the difference between governance and the state. The state is not really a government. It's a crime in action. It's an ongoing crime in action. It does things like what we just described. It makes war. It allows people who gain control of it, of this moral instrument, of this deific power that you heard Schmitt describe, to use it against others. And inherently, that's violence. That's violence in action.
It's hard for me to sit here, I mean, having done this show with you now for a while and roundly drubbing things like the Hong Konger, the Chinese laws that basically make it treasonous for anyone in the world to say anything bad about China. Just show up, present your passport and we'll escort you directly to jail, Bill.
Yep.
And yet here we are in America thinking that we're all high and mighty, with our democracy, and still perpetuating these same kinds of crimes on our own citizens.
Okay. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We're not better in that sense than anybody else. We may, as again, there may be degrees, but the essential thing is still there. The crime of what we call the state is still there. And why do we have the state? Because of fear.
It's better than fear.
Right? There's
right?
chaos out there. We have this fear that chaos is real and it's going to get us. And so we agree that we need a bully that is bigger than all of our fears.
Yes.
And that in a nutshell gets us to where we're at. If somehow or other we could spiritually undo the fear, we would not be trapped in theological concepts that are constructed and built upon fear.
It's the same coercion in government that you get in a fundamentalist religion.
Yes.
You have no choice. If you're going to be a part of one of the or the other or both, you follow the rules.
Okay.
Don't follow the rules, you're out. So
fear is subjective and it's in your head. Let's move to something that is objective.
Yes.
First off, we start with the premise. Premise number one. We'll put down 3 premises here. Premise number 1: people have a primary drive to be happy. They may have a number of motivations for the things that they choose to do and the way that they choose to go about doing them. But happiness always has its hand on the wheel. Happiness is primary. It's first. It's always present.
Yeah,
So whatever
life,
the other,
liberty, and the pursuit, right?
and the pursuit of happiness.
There we go.
Happiness matters. Listen, this is genetic. This is built into us. A dog on a hot day lays in the shade. Why? Because he's happier there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We do things, and sometimes it's to avoid a pain, right? Or it's to invest in our future. There's some of these happiness can be short-term or long-term, you know.
Sure.
But we are moving towards a relative increase in happiness. That is a primary drive.
Primary motivator.
You can identify some other drives, but I'm telling you, happiness always has its hand on the wheel.
Okay, number 2.
What's the greatest threat to your happiness?
Well, I'm such an outlier, Jim. I'm not sure I can answer that for everybody. But for me, the greatest threat is coercion. It's being forced to do something that I don't want to do.
But it takes a specific form. Like, okay, where I'm going here is violence.
Well, yeah, violence is a big threat.
If you knew that there were 2 places you were going to go to, and in one of those you were going to be shot and killed, and the other you were not going to be, it is pretty obvious where your happiness would take you.
Yes.
All things being equal. I recognize that some people might think, that there's a certain act. We won't say the word here we've already said enough words today that we have to worry about getting censored. But basically we're all pursuing happiness. That's what we're doing most of the time. People don't tend to walk off perfectly good buildings, right?
Right.
All right.
Number 3.
So let me just finish up number 2 and say if you were physically harmed, your happiness would decrease, would it not?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, right?
Okay.
You can have happiness. Happiness and harm do not coexist.
The second one is like to this other one. The third point that I want to make is like to the previous point. And that is that when you have your stuff broken, vandalized, stolen, when someone defrauds you, right? These forms of theft also always diminish your happiness, right?
They absolutely do, yes.
The invention of passwords, just passwords, right? And now all these verification things that they're doing to back up because passwords aren't sufficient, right? So the reason we have those is we want to protect our stuff, right? Why? Because we'll be less happy. You see how all this fits together here? There's one more thing I'd like to make clear before we get on to something called a natural principle. And that is how principles work in nature. Isaac Newton, we frequently today call it the law of gravity, but at the time he spoke of principles.
Yeah.
And a principle, you can have a definition where you're basically motivated to do certain things. These are particularly high values of yours. I will always wear black. You wear black when we're doing these podcasts. And there's a reason for that, folks. He's got a very good reason for it. Or you may say that I will never do something or I will always do something. These are values that are like super values. They're very, very core to who you are. And we can call that a moral principle. We'll come to the moral principle in a second, but there's a natural principle in the Newtonian sense. And that, in fact, so Newtonian that the favorite example I like to use is gravity, where if I take this pen and I let go of it, it's going to drop, right? And we know exactly how fast it's going to fall. And the knowledge of this allows us to build buildings and bridges. It governs. If it was suspended for a moment, chaos would result. So it is a predictable, it's an observable, predictable event. We can't say that the next time I let go of this pen, it won't drop. We can't guarantee that, but we can say that based on all past experience, we have great deal of expectation that not only will it drop, but we know how fast it will drop. And that's what a principle is.
This is different from people say science.
Yes.
This is a fundamental principle rather than an advancing research process.
Correct. So now, how does this all come together? Well, if we recognize that everyone's pursuing happiness and that the harms of violence and theft reduce that happiness, we can deduce out the following principle: that every single time someone experiences violence or theft against their person or property, their happiness, harmony, and prosperity will diminish.
This sounds very familiar, man.
We did a whole episode about this. It's called
Yep.
the natural principle of human respect.
Right.
So I want to contrast this against fear, which is in the head. It's invented. It's demonic, in my opinion, against a principle that we can repeatedly observe. It's reality. We know that this is how the world works every single time that we do it.
We're fundamentally happy people seeking happiness. When harm interferes with that, our happiness is diminished.
And it really is that simple.
And
what I just described to you, if you take it to its complete logical progression, no relationship that does anything that initiates violence or initiates theft of some sort is acceptable, because it brings down the flourishing of all of the individual, and collectively it affects us all.
Yes, it affects us all.
We can explain all of that in detail later. My point today is that this principle is greater than fear. It has the effect of being real. And every time we pretend that, well, somehow for the greater good, we've got to suspend this reality, that's fear talking. That's me demonizing and dehumanizing other people. Instead of going with the more hopeful reality of how nature actually works. We can increase happiness, harmony, and prosperity. And it's that harmony I'm most focused on today. Harmony becomes an expense to the current system, to the conflict machine, not political, conflict machine driven system we have today. It is a byproduct of that conflict machine.
So it's disharmony is the byproduct.
Yes.
Harmony is damaged by the operation of the conflict machine.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm clear.
Correct. And so now you start to see where people get angry and they begin to do things they shouldn't do. You start to see how people get murdered. You start to see how other people are sent to murder. You start to see how this violence spills out in various ways.
Mouthing
when
off
we
on
keep
social
adding
media,
violence,
yeah,
we get more violence.
Yes.
And we should. I am not shocked when this happens. Other people are shocked, right? How dare someone shoot at the president? Darn right, how dare. But wait a minute. Why aren't we condemning all violence? Why aren't you joining me in saying no more to this? Why are we assassinating human respect?
I have, as you can tell, become sort of speechless about all of this. And I'll ring it in on the thing that our SEAL said. If I'd met him in Paris over coffee, right? That reminds me of what we say all the time, sitting down with your enemy over some lemonade and actually listening to what's going on there.
Actually listening. So
this is not hard to do, but it seems to be very hard to end conflict and not become a part of the conflict. How do we get there, Jim?
Well, we have done what I consider to be my most important episode, which we will also put in the show notes, on Rene Girard, where he talks about how this blame game that we play leads to war, how this envy, this ritual almost of envy, ends up leading us into a war of all against all. The Hobbesian state doesn't happen by accident. And it involves blame and then scapegoating. And there's been a remarkable amount of people trying to figure out who's at fault, other than the person that pulled the trigger in this particular situation. And a desire to punish. People have to be punished. We got to punish people. Punishment must be meted out. And then we will all feel better. And Girard explains all of this. And by the way, that catharsis doesn't stick. It doesn't last. We're on to the next fight because we haven't done anything about the violence. That's my first grace point today. My second one. I hope this hits some people right between the eyes. I said at the outset, I cannot know the motives and hearts of what happened here, or how it happened and everything. This is more of a general statement, but we are not guarded in how we conduct our conversations. And we especially are not careful in front of our children. who are watching and absorbing everything and lack the context we have. I couldn't help wondering, because this is what I do, what's been said in front of the young man or to this young man that is alleged to have committed this act. What kind of conversations were had in front of him that made him think that maybe somehow or other this was a good or a heroic or a necessary or just a fun act to do? I don't know. But here's what I know. If you in any way cheered this or your disappointment was because it didn't end more badly for Donald Trump, Matthew 5:21-22 says, "You have heard that it was said of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, which means fool, shall be in danger of the council," meaning they should be tried in court. "But whoever says you fool shall be in danger of hellfire." Judgment comes for that. It wasn't just actually murdering, it was murder in your heart. And those statements, I'm sorry, they're murder in your heart. Now, before you get too excited and you say, "That's right, Jim, you tell those liberals." Hey, guys, you have been making jokes about the demise of the current president due to his age. You have had regular sport of it. You've even cheered it on. You're excited about how he's crumbling, how dementia may be taking over in his situation. You had murder in your heart. You want him to fall. And you may sit here and tell me how justified you are on either side of this argument. But you see how this whole system brought you to violence? How violence came and then you responded back in kind? Just in your heart. You didn't actually pull the trigger. You're a good guy. You're a good gal. But it was there in your heart. Because we decided that we need to settle things in a friend-enemy distinction. And so my final request to you, that instead of assassinating human respect, we need to begin practicing human respect. We need to operate under the naturally observable principle that anytime someone's stolen from, or their property's vandalized, or they're physically harmed, that their happiness, harmony, and prosperity will diminish. This harmony will always go down in those situations. And if we want greater harmony, then the entire practice of using violence, the entire friend-enemy distinction, we need to do everything we can to reduce and absolve and move on in a much better, interactive, understanding process that here at this show, we call grace.